I'm Susanna. Thank you so much for coming to, let's try this again. Hi, I'm Susanna. Thank you for coming to check out the behind the scenes unedited version. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, please leave them at giveagencydallas.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Joaquin was actually, while he's the first that shows up in the podcast. He was my 6th interview, but he was my first ask. So I was really excited to get him in and talk to him. Make sure you stay to the end because he does one of his new works that will come out in his book. And yeah, hope you enjoy. I love your t-shirt.
Thank you very much. I'm wearing the same shirt that I wore yesterday and the day before. I'm doing this. I don't know. I'm doing this thing. You've caught me on the tail end of this thing that I'm doing. I visited all 30 libraries. Did you know we have 30 libraries in Dallas?
I saw that on your Instagram post.
Yeah.
I thought there were more, but you were doing it in a certain amount of time,
30
right?
hours. Yeah.
Yes.
So 30 for 30.
Did you make it?
Yeah, with like 22 minutes to spare. But I wanted to just walk into every library and have a conversation with a staff member and also just a human being in that particular neighborhood. In the last 30 hours, I've driven into every neighborhood in Dallas.
Wow.
And a few of the librarians reminded me of this story that popped up years ago, I think maybe in D Magazine, of a woman who took her daughter to every library in Dallas, but it took like months.
Mm.
And I was like, I want to do that too, but I want to do it all in a day and a half. And so I know there are at least 2 people out there who've been to every library in Dallas. That mother and her child. Let's say 10. Let's say 10 people in the history of planet Earth have been to every library in Dallas. But I'm the only one that's ever done it in 30 hours.
What's the Ripley's? No, Guinness. Call Guinness.
So, but it was really cool. It was really beautiful seeing all these neighborhoods for, in half-hour intervals and 45-minute intervals, and just being in their space and looking at the things that exist around the library and the things that exist inside of them. I love this place very much. I've been in love with it my whole life. And Dallas, it's weird. And I started south and I just weaved my way north. It's an interesting way to see the city,
Well, Dallas has upped its library game in recent years. There's so many new ones.
Yeah.
And I love how they've incorporated some natural landscaping around the libraries to make them really beautiful.
Some gorgeous new libraries in our city. Yeah, for sure.
I grew up in libraries.
So did I.
Yeah.
So did I. I used to skip school and go to the library.
That was the only thing in town that I could do. I grew up in this really small town, and it was like, we're going to go to the library. That was like your event.
Yeah.
Event for the day.
I told a bunch of students, like, I'm a nerd. And they're like, what's a nerd? I said, I'm a Mexican nerd. When I used to skip school, I would go to one of 2 places. I would skip school and I would either go to the library, or I would skip school and I would go to the mothership on Mockingbird Lane, the Half Price Books mothership.
The Half Price
And
Books.
when it was across the way, it's in the new building, but it used to be across the way, across the street in the old building, that old wood building. Such a beautiful old building it used to be in. And I think now that old building's like an REI or something. But yeah, I would skip school and go read. Just go read poetry and read comic books and just be around words.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I had feet. I could walk anywhere in my city.
Well, and I saw you grew up like Henderson.
Henderson
That area has
and Belmont.
changed so much.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's not there anymore. It's someplace entirely different. It's not there. My tío Celestino told me one time. I was a mocoso, and so we were standing on this concrete porch of the little casita that my grandfather rented for us, and my tío Celestino was leaning on this splintered post, holding up this, dilapidated porch covering, and he said, "You see that over there?" And he pointed to the skyline. I said, "Yeah, I see it." He said, "That's money." He said, "We're too close to it. So they're gonna come and take all this from us." And I was like, "There's nothing to take. Like, have you seen our neighborhood? It's horrible. It's hideous. There's nothing pretty about our neighborhood." And I think to this day, I still believe that there was nothing pretty about my neighborhood when I was a mocoso, a snotty-nosed kid, but it was all beautiful, Every bit of it was beautiful in the real sense of the word. And he was right. They came and they took it. Money came and took the barrio of my youth. The little casita that my grandfather rented, it's now like a high-rise condominium, and Mrs. Rogers' house was across the street from my grandfather's house, which was like the nicest house in the barrio. It's a bar. It's like a really 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 nice like restaurant bar, and yeah, it's like Roy Hernandez's barber shop is gone, and Yeti Supermercado, the place I thought the only place you could buy groceries in Dallas, Texas, was Yeti Supermercado, which some people call Jerry's Supermarket for some reason, and it's a sushi bar.
Oh, I know exactly what
Yeah,
you're
you
talking
you
about now.
can't
Yeah.
write this. It just is. My Theo saw it coming, 40 years ago, and he was right.
Wow.
He was right. It's gone. It's all gone.
All new.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for being here
Oh,
with me
it's an honor.
today.
It's an honor
I'm
to be
so
here.
excited.
Yes.
So I'm going to formally introduce you after we've been talking for 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah.
So I was bragging about you to Michael because I was so excited to have you here today. My guest today is Joaquin Zihuatanejo, winner of the 2008 World Poetry Slam, the 2009 World Cup Poetry Slam, and Dallas's first official poet laureate. You are the author of 7 books with an 8th coming, right?
It's
Yes.
correct. Yeah.
And founded both Dallas Youth Poets to help young poets find their work. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
So you are now 6 months into your first of 2 years as a Dallas Poet Laureate.
Yeah.
And I read that you were projected to be presenting poetry at schools and official meetings. Has that what you've been doing? I know you've visited the 30 libraries.
No, yes, I've been very busy. I went from I think I went from a city not really knowing that I existed to a city that's sort of desperate to hang out with me. And it's
Oh.
lovely. I keep saying yes to everything. And Bobby Lefebvre is a poet I know from Denver, Colorado, who's a U.S. poet, who's a Denver poet laureate, city poet laureate there, and he's been reading my exploits on social media, and he sent me a private message, and he said, "Joaquin, you have to start saying no."
Oh.
I said, "I know you love Dallas, maybe more than I love Denver." He's like, "You're so madly in love with your city, but you can't say yes to everything. Part of your placement as a Dallas Poet Laureate is to generate new work, is to write, is to have space to create, and driving all over your city and performing at corporate events is lovely." He said, "But you can't do it every day because you got to write, you got to create." So I'm trying to remember that, but it's just hard to say no because I think everybody's very excited for poetry and very excited for the position, and I think the city is grateful that I'm here, and I think I'm very grateful that the city is seeing me and seeing poetry in a way that it hasn't in a long time, and it's wonderful. I mean, I won the World Cup. I won the the World Championship in the States and the World Cup in in Europe, and like I did a tour of Germany, and they had like a parade in my honor in like Regensburg, and like in Dallas, no one knew. It's
Yeah.
like, so, but poetry is it's a different world in Germany.
Is
Yeah.
this job? Is it a job?
I think
is
it's,
it
it's I think more than anything, it's just an honor.
An honor? Is
Yeah.
it what you thought it would be when they were like, "Congratulations, you're Dallas's poet laureate," and now you're 6 months in?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is what I thought it was going to be. But I think in a way, I'm trying to turn it into something that maybe they didn't think it was going to be. Like I'm trying to make it very hands-on and very. I want the Dallas Poet Laureate to be very connected to the city, and I want the city to be very connected to the Dallas Poet Laureate. I don't know that they, or maybe even I, thought it would be as intense as it has been, but yeah, I know laureates. Like there are laureates all over the country in cities and states and whatnot that really it's just more of just an honorary title, and it doesn't really, you don't really do anything. You're not really asked to do anything, even though you're that city or that state's laureate. But I didn't want that to be the case for Dallas. I wanted there to be a very tangible connection between the city and the city's laureate. So
Well, it's so lovely that you have this love for Dallas, and excuse me, I can feel it, I can see it, and I love that you have it because I feel like Dallas needs that ambassador. I went to this meeting and this real estate person basically was she's representing homes to people coming in and bashing Dallas in the process.
Mm,
Well, we don't have mountains. We don't have this. And I was like, no, we have so much cool stuff. We have
mm.
so much cool people. We need to talk about it. So
Absolutely.
I love that you are so passionate about it. Have you met other? I mean, now that you're the poet laureate, are you in like a poet laureate club basically with all the other cities?
No, I was lovely enough to when it all happened. I mean, the morning news and D magazine and the city made such a big harumph about it that it got out, and so many poets from all over the country who are their city's poet laureate or their state's poet laureate reached out to me and congratulated me and created dialogue and discourse. Some of them I knew, some of them I didn't, which was lovely. But I will tell you this: most of the ones who reached out to me to create this dialogue with me told me point blank, like they could not believe what Dallas had done
Mm,
for this position, because like they said there are state poet laureates who don't have an office in their central library, of the state's capital, and don't have an honorarium given to them, a stipend, and so yeah, Dallas went all in, and I'm so grateful that they did, for me, but also for the next Dallas Poet Laureate in perpetuity.
I think it's an exciting time to be in Dallas. Dallas is having a artistic rejuvenation
Yeah,
or growth. Maybe not
yeah,
rejuvenation, but spiritual birth in a way.
absolutely.
Um,
When I was a Mocoso, like the arts district that is now our art, like it was non-exist. I mean, like, and look what's happened in 40 years. I mean, I think our arts district it's among the most astonishing in the country. You know,
I
it's
agree.
it's incredible. It's incredible.
Um, do you think these 2 years will be one of those things that you don't even comprehend until it's over?
I think so. I do. I
Just
do.
ride the wave?
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of putting it. My former department chair. I was a public high school English teacher for years, and my former department chair, Miss Madison, when I stepped away from teaching, she said to me, "You're on a wave."
Mhm.
She said, "Just ride it,
Right.
because you never know when it's going to come crashing back down to earth." But the last thing she said was, "You're still teaching."
Mhm.
She said, "You're in front of students, you're in front of grad students, you're in front of college students, you're in front of high school students. Even if you're just reciting poems, you're in front of them, and that's teaching." She said, "I'll always see you as a teacher who moonlights as a poet," and I love that.
That is so nice.
Yeah.
So I knew when I was, gosh, in second grade that I wanted to be an actor.
Mhm.
Did you always know that you wanted to be a poet?
Yes, I mean that wasn't the original dream. The original dream was I was gonna win La Copa del Mundo. I was gonna win the World Cup.
In soccer?
Yeah,
Yes.
in football, yes. But my tío Celestino, my tío Tino took me to my first uh, season of semi-professional soccer when I was like age 6, and I was terrible. And he pulled me aside at the end of the season. He was like, "Mio, do you still want to be a professional soccer player when you grow up?" And I was like, "Uh huh."
Mhm.
He said, "I got." He said, "Que lo dice eso con todo respeto y afecto, pero." And my uncle said, "I mean this with all due respect and affection, but." He was about to hurt your feelings in Spanish. And that's when he told me, "You suck. You are horrible at soccer. But you've been making me take you to that stupid Lakewood library for years. You used to read those little picture books and the one sentence on the bottom. Now you're reading picture books with like whole paragraphs on the bottom." He's like, "I'm a grown man. I've never read a book in my life." He said, maybe it's words for you. Maybe words will be your way out of the barrio. Maybe words will be your way back in to save us all." He said that to me. I remember that. I wrote it down. I've been journaling since I was like 7. And he said, maybe your words will be your way back in to save us all. Save it. Like I carried that weight with me for my whole life to save
Wow.
us all. I remember walking on Yerisu Mercado, just like pointing at people and saying aloud, "I'm going to save you.
I'm going to
I'm
save
going to
you.
save you."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
When you think back to that time in the supermercado, do you ever think, like, I have conversations with my younger selves and I'm like, listen, it's going to be a little bit different than what you thought.
Yeah.
What does your younger self think of all the success that you've had?
Yeah. No, I'm not sure what he thinks. I sometimes feel this real sense of guilt that I made it out. And a lot of the mocosos, a lot of the kids I used to run with didn't. Um, a lot of the people that I loved, um, are no longer with us. Like I think like my abuelo, my grandfather who raised me when my mother could not, my father would not. Like if he was still alive today, oh my gosh, electric truck,
Mm.
biggest house in Preston Hollow, the life he'd have, because I'd give it to him. I'd make it so. It's what I do. I get things done.
How
And
old was he? How old were you when he passed?
I was a teenager. He passed when I was 14.
So,
So I had him through my formative years, and then I lost him, at the beginning of my teenage years. But
what would he think now?
my partner tells me all the time, like, when something happens, a little bit of light comes into our lives, and your grandfather will be so proud of you in this living, breathing moment. I really hope that he would. I think that he would, and I think that he is. I love the young generation so much. I love being around college students and high school students for my work because they invented woke. I love that. I love the realm of woke so much. I mean, I've been like flirting with the idea of like making my pronouns they, and part of it is just what is gender anyway. But part of it is like I feel like I'm carrying spirits sometimes with
Mhm.
me.
Mhm.
Like sometimes I very like I'll feel my grandfather like right there with me, like in that moment. And there's more than one of us, on that stage or in that poem, or my Theo's with me. It's like I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm a part of this collective we that's moving through this journey that I'm taking, and they're with me, and they're accomplishing it all too. So sometimes I feel like a they more than a he.
You, I going back through a lot of your poems and your talks, you talk a lot about your family.
Mm.
Um, you know, and I have to say I loved rereading all of your poetry because I read your poetry initially when you became the poet laureate, and then I reread and rewatched so much prepping for this interview, which is kind of like sanctioned stalking, which is really fun. Um, but final exam for my father,
Mm.
great example.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm like I have chills happening now as I'm thinking about it. Um, which was your talk to your father when he left you.
Yeah.
Do you Do you relive all that hurt every time you do that poem?
Yeah, I do. That's a tough one. I used to tell my students the ones that hurt the most are the ones that are the most important. And that one, I mean, like when I was crafting it, um, gosh, it was like aching to come out of me. And it was aching as it was appearing on the page. And it was aching during revision. Um, I sometimes get really emotional while doing that poem. Um, but I know that I have to do it because it's the one that so many young people come up to me afterwards, and like I'll do an hour reading now, and so many young people, whether they're high school students or college students or middle school students, will come to me and say, "That's my poem." It's like
Oh.
you were telling my story, and that's tragic to think that I'm connecting with so many young people all over the country, based off the fact that we are fatherless in a sense. Um, but that connection, that shared humanity, it's sort of like the magic and the beauty of poetry, allowing people who never would have been connected in life to be connected for a moment. Um, yeah, that started as a creative writing assignment in my high school English class. I was, as students said to me, "I'm so sick of tests. All we do is test." And that's when I was like, "Okay, let's do this. Let's write a poem in the form of a test, everybody, to
Oh.
someone." And the advice I would give them every year was like, "If you're gonna do this, it better be someone you have some pretty serious questions for." And I would write it every year with them. I would write one, and I remember the first several I wrote was to the school board, to the superintendent, and to the principal, and to uh, I think I wrote one to the Texas House of Representatives one time.
Mm.
Um, but I realized, many years, after this initial idea of doing it with my creative writing class, when I really sat down to write the poem and to try it, I remember, I need to follow the advice I gave them, and I need to choose someone I have some very serious questions for. And there was only one. There's only one answer, and that was my father. And that poem just originally, I think it was 33 questions long, the
Mm.
first draft. And I was like, oh, this poem is way too long. Poems are so long. Sometimes I love short poems, and I was like, I've got to cut this. And then I got it down to like 10 questions, and it was like, there needs to be more here. I think I'm anchored on the stage for like 60 seconds in these questions. I want to be anchored for like 2 minutes. And I knew I needed to give it some more breath and give it some more silence and give it some more substance. And yeah, that's a magical. I remember many, many years ago, because I wrote that poem so long ago now. Um, a student came up to me at a university. I want to say I was at Clemson, and they said, "Joaquin, are you on Tumblr?" And I was like, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not." And they said, "You know that poem has its own Tumblr verse." I said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "It's the most shared poem on Tumblr.
Oh, wow.
Like there are like tens and tens and tens of thousands of people writing their own final exam to their grandfather, to their grandmother, to their mother, to their
Oh,
brother,
wow.
and it's the most shared poem on that platform." And I didn't know that I didn't know that was a thing, a Tumblr verse, that it had its own Tumblr verse, and I thought that was cool. And yeah, that little poem's done
Do,
some very big things in my life.
do you have a relationship with your father?
I don't know if my last book, I don't have a copy with me. It's called Arsonist, and this was a book that I did. It started during my MFA, and there's an epigraph, a quote that opens that book, and the quote that opens the book Arsonist, it reads. It's from a Facebook message request that I got from someone, and it's 26 words, and it reads, "You don't know me, not really, and I hate to tell you like this, but my father, I mean, our father, has died." And that's how I found out that the man who left my mother and me all those years ago had died from a stranger who shared half of my blood, And this was directly in the middle of my MFA when I got this message. And I was writing these large anthematic poems of witness and politic and protest. And I went home. We were actually on holiday. We were in Aspen, my partner and I. And when I got this message, and I didn't even get it. My partner got the message, and they said, she said, "Joaquin, I just got this Facebook message request. And it's not for me. It's for you. Someone who recognizes my last name as yours." And they've been trying to get, because I never check my Facebook Messenger. I think I've probably got thousands of them, and
Me too.
I'm really bad about that. But she handed me her laptop, and that's when I read that message. And then when I went home and got in my office, I just collapsed on my floor. I mean, I wept for my father for the first time in my life. And had all these poems tacked on my office wall at my home, that were my new manuscript. I was instructed by Sherwin Bitsui, this genius professor of mine, to tack our poems on the wall and put new revisions on top of old revisions so that you see the poem grow in depth and length.
Mm.
And that night I ripped everything off the wall. I just tore it all down. I crumpled it.
Do you feel like you got robbed from making peace with him? Or did
That
you?
that whole book, that whole book, Arsonist, was peace. It was about peace and it was about love. And this was my chance to explore the possibility of loving my father. And I remember when I finished the book, and it became my creative portion of my 3-part thesis for my master's degree. It was originally titled "Causes of Degradation," because that's the first poem I wrote that night after I pulled myself up off the ground with all these poems crumpled on the floor. I sat at my desk and I wrote down in my journal, "How did your father's absence make you feel as a child?" That's what I wrote down in my journal, a question. And underneath that, I wrote the word "degraded." That's what I wrote, degraded. It made me feel degraded. And so I pulled out my laptop and I typed in the word "degraded" into the search engine, and I hit enter. And all these things came back. But the first thing was this scientific essay on causes of land degradation. There were 11 of these prominent causes, and it was a all capped bold word with this scientific essay underneath. I read the whole thing from beginning to end, and it was a great essay. And after I completed the essay, I thought to myself, what if I took these large, bold, all capped words, pest and vegetation, or whatever the word was, and place it on a piece of paper, and then write a poem to my father. Urbanization was one of them. And so it became this sort of like 11-part sequence poem that was one of the longest things I've ever written in my life. And that was the beginning of the book. And so that's what the working title was, "Causes of Degradation," because that was the first poem, and that was how I felt. But there's so much fire imagery in that book that I wanted to change the title to Arsonist. And I was having conversations with people at my MFA program that I think I need to change the title to Arsonist. And then it won the prize that it won. It won the award, and it was going to become a book. And when it won the prize, it was titled "Causes of Degradation" still. And I remember James Olunyoda Stevens, this brilliant genius professor of mine during my MFA, said to me, "Joaquin, I heard you're thinking of changing your title to arsonist." I said, "Yeah, I really want to, but I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing." And he said, "You have to." And I said, "Well, I think I do too, but why?" He says, "Don't you see the word arsonist has the word son, S-O-N, in the middle of it?" He said, "But that single word, arsonist, contains the sentence, our son is inside that single word." And when he said that to me, and I knew it had to be the title, and I called my publisher, and they were already working on cover art. And I was like, "I'm changing my title." And they were like, "To what?" And I said, "Arsonist." And they said, "Why?" And I told them what I just told you, and they were like,
Yep.
"Damn it."
Yep.
They were like, "It's got to be that."
Well, the visual imagery, an arsonist blowing up the relationship,
Yeah.
like that's where I thought you were headed with it.
Yeah.
But now my head has exploded because that's really good. Now you also, in a letter to John,
Yeah.
which, I love that one so much. Which that's the one that you won the World Cup Poetry Slam.
That was the one that won it in the final round for the United States of America that year.
So powerful.
And the crazy thing is, I told my tío I was going to win the World Cup when I was a mocoso, and I won the World Cup in Paris. It was that competition in Europe is called the World Cup Poetry Slam Championship, and it's not the big one for football, for soccer. It's a little one for poetry. But I won it. I tell students all over the country, like, I said I was going to win the World Cup, and I did.
And you
so
did.
Dream big, dream big.
Were you able to tell your tío?
No, he wasn't with me then. I lost him 2 years after my grandfather passed. I lost him to cancer. Yeah.
Bummer. But in that poem, you also reference the moon, your mom, sun, your dad, and you living in the eclipse.
Yeah.
Do you think that hurt that you had as a kid living there opened you up to be able to have this voice as a poet, the emotional well, or do you think you had it the whole time?
I think it's a little bit of both happening at the same time. My abuelo would make me read to him at night. He would find things on the side of the road. After he'd stopped working in the fields picking cotton, he was a yard man here in Dallas. And there was not a lot of work to be found in Dallas proper at the time because there were so many yard companies doing what he was doing in Dallas. So he would journey to these far-off foreign suburbs, places like Plano, Texas, and Garland, Texas, places I didn't even know existed as a child. And he'd find things on the side of the road, and one of his most sought-after treasures was like boxes of books. And he'd bring them home and store them in this little two-tier shelf in the living room in the sala. And I'd have to read to him at night. And I'd read in English, and he'd critique my reading abilities in Spanish. And when I would see his face contort, it was like into like a look of concern or a look of sadness or a look of joy. It was usually because I was reading a poem. There was this Norton anthology of poetry that found its way onto our shelf that he found on the side of the road in this box. And I think he loved them because they were short and they were accessible. Poems are very accessible because they're only a page in length. It's not like reading a novel. But they're also very song-like and fluid. And when I would see his face contort, I was like, I remember being 7 or 8 and thinking to myself, this is what I want to do. I want to make people's faces contort with words. And I remember my tío Celestino, because I think he'd forgotten that he'd asked me what I wanted to be. And when I said I want to win the World Cup, it was about a year later, I was 7 or 8. And he said to me, after a few cold Budweiser beers, he said to me, "Mio, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said to him, I looked him right in the face, I said, "Poet." I said that to him as a child. And he said to me, "Poet." Poet, man, how you going to build a house made of poems? That's what he said to me. How are you going to build a house made of poems? Right now, like today, right now, our right now that you and I are sharing, I'm writing this quasi-autobiographical YA novel about a 14-year-old boy in the barrio who's being raised by his grandparents and his drunk uncles. And he lives in a neighborhood that's surrounded by gangs and poverty and depression and oppression and a city government that either doesn't see it or doesn't care. And the only place that this boy in this book finds refuge is in a world of poetry, in a world of poems. He's becoming a street poet. And the title of this book I'm writing is called House Made of Poems. my Theo said, "How are you going to build a house made of poems?" And I'm writing a book called House Made of Poems because my Theo didn't write poems down; he just spoke them. You
I was
know?
about to
Yeah,
say, I wondered if because the words that you use when you quote
yeah,
your Tio, your grandparents, they are poetry.
yeah. I was surrounded by poets. They just didn't write them. They spoke them. But poetry started as an oral tradition centuries ago. It was spoken before it was written. You know,
It was the only way stuff was passed down.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm honored to be a small part of this large tradition.
It seems like you give your grandfather or grandparents a lot of.
Grandparents, my abuelita Juanita is a huge influence in my life. I lost her very young. I was probably 7 when I lost her to a heart attack, and but I still remember her. I have so many vivid memories of her, even at age 5 and 6 and 7 before she passed. She's such a large force in my life. Um,
But they raised you.
yeah,
Your grandfather taught you what it is to be a man,
yeah,
a poet.
yeah.
Do you have kids?
I do have 2 daughters, and they're both grown and conquering the world now. I'm so
Grandkids
proud of
yet?
them. No, none. Yeah, none.
Not yet.
No. I don't know. Down the line, maybe, but I'm so proud of them that they're just sort of they're steeped in their journey, and their mom comes from Pleasant Grove, which is a tough neighborhood, and I come from old East Dallas, and just was a tough neighborhood back then, and the girls both have this toughness in them that I think comes from Pleasant Grove and comes from East Dallas. It's sort of just in them, without them even knowing that those places, are out there because.
Somehow the Grove became cool. You can find Grove on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
From the Grove,
Yeah, PG. I love. I just did a 30-day tour of a 30-hour tour of 30 libraries, and when I got to Pleasant Grove and got to the Pleasant Grove Branch Library, I love that their sign just reads PGBL.
PGBL.
And I told my partner that I was like, only in Pleasant Grove would they have a sign that says PGBL, and like that's the only sign. And she goes, yeah. She goes, I'm from the Grove, in PG. We ain't got time to mess around with all the. She goes, we ain't got time to mess around with all those syllables. She goes, it fits us. I love that.
When people, it. I wanted to ask you this question earlier, but we kind of shifted away because it was back to the Denver Poet Laureate saying, "Hey, you need to write.
Yeah.
You need to write." Do you like? Because it seems like you really like performing.
I do.
Like
Yeah.
sharing your poetry.
Yeah.
Which one do you like better?
That's a tough question. That's a really tough question.
Or do they go hand in hand? You can't have one without the other. But because you perform your poetry, which is not always the way of poets. Many poets write without ever expecting to perform. But yours, especially watching your performances, you're so good at it.
Yeah, I think it's both happening at the same time. Before I got my MFA and before I really started, poetry was this very organic thing that just kind of just happened. And maybe I don't know where it was coming from. It was just, I was channeling it from my uncles and my grandfather and the spirits that were all around me. But then in getting my MFA and thinking about the line and the breath and white space and silence inside the words and all the technical things that go along with the essence of the poem, that excites me so much now. So I think there was a time in my life where I just looked forward to the stage more than anything. And now I find myself looking forward to the page more than anything. But I will say that like there's nothing like being on a stage and sharing a poem. There's nothing like it at all. It's electric. I think it's when I feel most alive. I remember I had a poet say to me one time, Joaquin, where'd you get your theater training from? Because I've never seen a poet do what you do on a stage. It's almost like you're a thespian, like you were born to act or just to be on stage in some way. And I was like, I've never had any. I said, I know where I got my theater training. I was a public high school English teacher, and I got to teach Romeo and Juliet at 8 a.m. on Monday to 14-year-olds. So I better be damn entertaining.
Yes, you should.
Because I'm selling something they don't want to buy, and I'm a really good salesman of words. I think today if I had to represent the U.S. in the World Championship of Poetry Slam, I don't know if I like my odds these days. I've gotten older and grayer, and there are a lot of poets out there who are younger and hungrier than I am now. But if there was ever a World Championship of teaching, I like my odds. I don't know if there's any way we can do what I can do in a classroom.
You mentioned the breath, and Shakespeare in almost the similar sentences, which I love. I'm a huge fan of Shakespeare and the
Hmm.
breath. And I wondered that. Do you plan your breaths when you're
Oh,
doing it?
yeah. And I've gotten to where my breaks, where when I'm writing a poem on the page, drafting a poem, I'm trying to be mindful of line break and silence and space inside the poem, like as it rests on the page, because that equals breath. White space equals breath and silence. And I'm trying to be very mindful of that. Um, but yeah, I do think about that a lot. And if I feel like the breath needs to be longer, I'll go back to the page and revise based off the breath, because sometimes the page has to be changed for the recitation. Um, Sometimes I know if this is a poem that I want to breathe life into in front of an audience, uh, if they're going to get their hands on it someday in some journal or in some manuscript that I write, I want it to mirror the breath that I'm giving it on the stage. So sometimes the performance and the practicing of a poem in my office uh, over and over and over and
Over
over
and over.
again leads to revision on the page.
So, 102 is the poem
Yeah.
that I read it first, and you
Hmm.
talk about space, and I wasn't sure if, because I was looking at it on the web, I was like, maybe this is, the formatting is off. But hearing you talk now, it's not, is it?
No,
There's
not at all.
huge,
Yeah.
huge breaks between the words.
Yeah, this is from the new work. This is from the book that I've finished slash finishing, Occupy Whiteness, and I've been telling people about this new work. It's not the most beautiful work I've ever done, but it is the most important. Like, these are the most important poems I've ever written in my life. They're not the most beautiful. They're not the most fluid, but they are the most important. Um, and that space is intentional, and that silence is intentional, because I'm trying to make the reader experience what it is to be in a desert, surrounded by nothingness, uh, in 102-degree temperatures, with very little water, and this promise of El Norte, this thing that is the North, that is the United States of America. Like, I want them to experience that solitude and that silence and that thirst.
Experiencing the poem by just reading it was one, excuse me, one experience, and immediately I was like, oh, I think I know exactly what's happening in this poem. But then when I listened to, there was the intro from the people, the poem a day,
Mhm.
and then you explained some of the story before you went into it, and it made a whole new experience with the same piece of art,
Yeah,
or maybe it's two pieces of art at that
maybe it is.
time.
Maybe it is happening at the same time.
I just read Solito
Mhm.
by Javier Zamora,
Yeah.
which I have a 10-year-old boy, and I saw it and I thought, oh, I'm going to read this. This is going to resonate with me. And I immediately saw it. And so what is Occupy Whiteness? I have an idea now going into
Yeah,
it.
the new book is dedicated to my grandparents, my abuelita Juanita and my abuelo. Not as I knew them in life, as these elders, as my grandparents, but it's dedicated to them when she was 17 and he was 18. I've been haunted and blessed by this image of my grandmother and my grandfather standing at the edge of the river, looking back at everything that they've left behind them, right? A language, a culture, a country, and waiting for night to come, and entering that river. I was 17 once, you know? I cannot imagine the courage it takes to do this, and carrying only the things that they can press against their chest. And I know they probably waited for nightfall, and I know they probably looked at each other, and just to be as silent as possible, maybe said one word to each other, or just two words to each other. And they entered, and they crossed, and they don't realize it because they're young and stupid and impossibly beautiful and perfect. But they carry me with them, and they carry every poem I will ever write with them across that river. And that has just been resonating with me I have a beautiful life. I didn't always have a beautiful life, but I have a beautiful life with an incredible partner and 2 daughters who are both working on grad degrees, and it's a long way from that river. And, I am the proud grandson of immigrant field workers. They both worked in the cotton fields for years. They found their way to Trumbull, and then they just followed the fields in North Texas and Southern Oklahoma and East Texas as well, West Texas también, um, before settling down in a place of opportunity for their children, my uncles and aunts, that was Dallas, Texas. Um, but I come from immigrants, and I wanted this new book, Occupy Whiteness, to be for them, to capture their experience. And when I thought it was done, I gave it to Will Evans and the team at Deep Vellum Books about a month or two ago. And Sebastian Paramor, who's my editor, gave me some revision notes and some challenges. And then they contacted me a month or so ago and said, Joaquin, I love these poems, how you sort of are creating in a way this new thing that you're calling this hybrid erasure. He's like, but wouldn't it be cool if this book explored the concept of hybridity even more, and was even more of a hybrid in and of itself, meaning that there's this poetry manuscript inside this book, but there are also these essays that exist inside the book as well that are connected to the poems in one way, but also disconnected from them in another way. And as soon as they said this to me, I was like, yes, like, yes. But I told Will Evans, my publisher, I was like, I've gotten this feedback and I'm thinking about putting all these essays inside this book, and what was going to be this sort of 98-page poetry manuscript might turn into like this 200-page thing. And Will, who's such a beautiful man, said to me, it's your book. Let's make the book you want to make. He's like, I don't care how thick it is. We'll find the money. We'll get it done. And then I told, Sebastian, my editor, my concerns. I was like, man, this book is going to be, in terms of cost product for making a 200-page book with some pages black, some pages gray, some pages white. It's going to be an expensive book to just create, let alone sell. And that's when Sebastian said to me, "You're a poet. Don't worry about price point production."
Mm-mm.
He said, "Worry about the poem. Worry about the essays. Worry about this collection and this book and what it needs to be. Let me and let Will and let the team worry about everything else." So it has been such a joy to be a part of this new Deep Vellum team that's done such great things over the last 12 years in Dallas.
Well, I want you to read one of your poems. And while you are, I'm going to tell you, Will is on my want list to come in and interview.
Yes.
He was actually on the list, but then when I was stalking you for this interview, I saw that how you're involved with him, and I was like, oh yeah, he's totally coming on now.
Absolutely. So I'm going to read something that's going to find this has found its way into the new manuscript, Occupy Whiteness, as well. And this is one of these sort of like prose pieces that is not a poem, but is going to amplify some of the things that are happening in some of the poems. And I'm not going to be acknowledging these things in the contents. The only thing that will appear in the contents are the poems. So there are going to be so many pages in the book that are undocumented inside the book, undocumented.
Interesting.
There are so many people in this country who are undocumented, and they're a part of this place. They're very much a part of this country, and yet still some people see them as outsiders, not belonging. So there are these pages that are going to be in the book that are going to be these sort of outsiders that I think some of the readers might see as not belonging in this collection, but very much belong.
Okay.
So this is called Boy Made of Dust, on the life and death of Adam Toledo. On March 29th, shortly before 3 a.m., Adam Toledo was shot and killed by a white police officer. Adam was running from the police officer at the time of the shooting, was carrying a gun in his right hand. He ditched the gun behind a wooden fence, turned with his arms raised upright in the air, a submissive position, and was shot in the chest by a Chicago police officer. He died moments later at the scene. Adam was 13 years old. All true. The summer of 1984, I was 13 years old. On a makeshift football field formed with 4 stolen City of Dallas orange cones and a gridiron that was 1/3 dirt and 2/3 dream, we played Steve and his crew, the Northside Homies, in a game of 9-on-9 tackle football. They were older than we were. They were faster and stronger. They outnumbered us and actually subbed in players from time to time. There were 9 of us. I was the smallest and the weakest. But we had all been playing street football together since we were mocosos. We had developed complicated plays drawn in the dirt. In one play, I was Tony Hill running a slant. In another, I was Drew Pearson running a button hook. In every play, Jesus Santos was Roger Staubach, dropping back to throw a spiral as sacred as his name. We beat them. Not by much, but enough to piss them off something fierce. The fight started when Steve, who was the biggest Mexican I'd ever seen in my entire life, jumped Gustavo, our leader. Steve's best friend, whose name I can't remember, jumped in to make it 2-on-1. In an instant, Manny turned to me and shouted, "Joaquin, go get Gustavo's and Jorge's brothers." I ran the 3 blocks back to Gustavo and Jorge's house. I didn't run through the streets, but as the crow flies, cutting through yards and jumping chain link fences to make good time, Gustavo and Jorge's older brothers were always in and out of the pen, so I didn't know who I would find. As I approached their house, out of breath, I ran around back, and there, working an old 1976 Buick Regal, was one of their brothers and Tori, a vato loco who had just gotten out of the Marines and at the time had only 3 passions in life: lifting weights, boxing, and smoking mota. Between rapid and short breaths, I muttered, "Steve and his crew jumped Gustavo, the dirt field behind Bonham Elementary." They told me to get in the back seat. I did as I was told. They slammed the hood shut and jumped in, and we sped off. It must have taken us less than 90 seconds to get there. On the way, Tori pulled a snub-nosed .38 Special out of the glove box, flipped the cylinder open to see if it was loaded. It was. We drove over the curb, across the basketball blacktop, at one point driving directly through an old set of swings onto the dirt field. Everything seemed to be simultaneously moving in slow motion and at breakneck speed, like we were in some low-budget Michael Bay movie, only this was real. Gustavo was on the ground taking a beating from Steve and some other guy who was the second biggest Mexican I'd ever seen in my life. All of our crew were either being held back by multiple members of their crew or engaged in fights with 2 or more of them. Manny, who had never backed down in a fight in his life, was having trouble holding his own. But Jesus had one foot on one guy's neck while he punched another guy he had in a headlock into submission. I jumped out of the car. A gordo, I didn't see it all, punched me directly in the mouth. I fell back, and just as he was about to kick me, the shots rang out. Gustavo's brother had taken the gun from Tori and fired it in the air 4 times. Every one of their crew scattered. But Steve just froze. Tori and Gustavo's brother rushed him. Tori held his arms behind his back while Gustavo's brother pistol whipped him. Steve's face was covered in blood. As he crawled away, Gustavo picked himself up from the beating he had taken and ran up on Steve and kicked him in the ribs for good measure. Then the sirens rang out. Before I knew it, there were 2 DPD squad cars at the edge of the park right where Vickery meets Henderson Ave. We all ran. Gustavo's brother handed Manny the gun. He and Tori jumped back in the Buick and were gone. One squad car trailed after them. The 2 other officers got out in pursuit on foot. We all spread out, but Manny and I ran together. As we ran, Manny said to me, "I can't fuck with Juvie again. Take this," and he handed me the gun. As we turned into the alley that paralleled Bonita Boulevard, we heard the officers shout for us to stop. This only made us run with more veracity. I was 13 years old, running from a white cop with a blood-covered, loaded gun in my hand. All true. The alley meandered to the left, and I tossed the gun in a pile of garbage that was slowly being overtaken by a cluster of sunflowers. Months later, we would walk past those same sunflowers, and Manny would say to me, "It's funny how those things grow best in muck and filth." He was right. They did. So did we. The cop was gaining on us. The alley was a dead end. Just ahead of us was a brick wall that on first glance appeared to have no footing. Manny, who was running about 10 feet ahead of me, had to have been 1/2 acrobat on his mother's side, 1/2 leopard on his father's side. He hit that wall in stride with his right foot and lunged for the top of the wall. In an instant, he was over it and gone. I could feel the cop right behind me. Then I felt his fist crumple the back of my windbreaker. I let both arms flail behind me and ran right out of my chaqueta. I followed Manny's lead, and in an instant, I was over the brick wall as well. I landed wrong on my left ankle. I limped for days, telling my abuelo I heard it playing soccer. It always hurt when I lied to him, even if it was a lie to protect his feelings. I was 13 years old. I was not killed that day. I did not deserve to die that day. Had I been killed by that white police officer that day, lying face down in the muck and mire, sunflowers swaying toward the light as they always want to do, you would not be reading this. My partner would have fell in love with someone else. My daughters would still look more like their mother, but not at all like me. The poems unwritten, the pages blank, the students would have sat in front of another teacher who may or may not have loved teaching as much as I do. All true. Adam Toledo has an older cousin named Lupita Perez. Lupita has a 7-year-old daughter named Kayla. Every time Adam would go visit them, he would treat Kayla's dolls as though they were living, breathing babies and hold them and sing to them and be absolutely gentle with them. He did this to make Kayla laugh, which she did every time. Adam was skinny and funny and loving. He loved movies, especially ones with zombies in them. The guys I used to run with, Gustavo, Jorge, Mateo, Jesus, Jose, Red, Jojo, Manny, none of them were bad boys. They were lost boys who sometimes did bad things. Adam was not a bad boy. Adam may have been a lost boy who sometimes did bad things, but he was not formed from dust. He was formed from love and lust and flesh and bone and tears and hopes and fears and dreams and star stuff and, yes, even dust. He could have been a teacher or a soldier or a writer or a mechanic or an actor or a husband or a father or a dentist or a retiree or a bad golfer or a grandfather. He could have been your someday friend or mine. He could have been all those things and more, but he can't because he was killed that night in that alley. Adam was 13 years old. He did not deserve to die that night. I'd like to think in the moments before his death, he caught a glimpse of a sunflower growing in the muck and mire, leaning toward him. After all, sunflowers always lean toward the light.
That was so good.
Thank you.
Joaquin Zihuatanejo, thank you. Thank you so much for saying yes to me.
You're welcome. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely.
Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. In the future, I will come up with a very cool Marvel-like surprise ending. But in the meantime, thanks. Drop us a line at giveagencydallas.com. Have a good one.